Hi, everybody. My name's Sandy Beach, and I'm an alcoholic. How you all doing? Well, I don't know about you, but I could have Bobby go on for 2 more. I'd be very happy to sit back and listen. That was, I told him myself that that's the best presentation of the traditions that I've ever heard anywhere. And, And his explanation of service work is just remarkable because it's a very difficult subject to talk about and to keep anybody's attention and all of that. And I think everybody probably got inspired here. You'll all be signing up for committees and every other kind of thing when you leave here. And of course, you'll be the one that gets the reward from that service thing because I was in the military and we were very conscious about pay grades and what rank you were, you know what I mean? The whole thing was organized like that. And the highest pay grade we have in Alcoholics Anonymous is servant. And you come in here with other titles like big shot or senator or whatever, you know, the housewife in charge of the whole house, and then you keep working all the way up to servant. And when you finally get there, you've got a good program, and you find that you're been able to discard the tremendous burden of being all those other things. That wasn't your job anyway to be that stuff. That's our higher power's job. I think sometimes the sobriety is really transferring all the heavy lifting to God so that you can just be free to enjoy today. But a lot of us don't want to give up that heavy lifting. We've been carrying that. I remember when I first got sober, I had a drop the rock thing, and I think that's what that was all about was, why don't you get rid of that? Well, it's mine. And it's like, I thought up this stupid way of life, and I'm not letting it go that easily. It's sort of a pride of authorship, that I know it's stupid, but I'm the guy who put this thing together, and I'll look bad getting rid of it. Not as bad as you are by keeping it. Anyway, my sobriety date is December 7th, 1964. And I've had the same sponsor now for almost 40 years, and he lives not too far from here, up near Fredericksburg. And he came into my life on that particular day. We were both in the Marine Corps up in Quantico. And I had, I don't know why I called AA. I didn't have that much evidence that I was an alcoholic, but I was due back in the nut ward Monday, and I had been let out for the weekend. And they told me if I ever drank again, my career in the Marine Corps was over. And I thought I would join AA on the outside. And then if anything bad happened, I could tell the Marine Corps, well, I joined AA and, which you suggested, and I'm all screwed up, so it's not my fault, so I get to keep my career. And so I called the intergroup, and it took a few hours. It's up in Northern Virginia, and they finally got a hold of Bill. There was only one other guy in the Quantico area, and he was it. And so during that time, I had a couple drinks stay down. So I said, well, actually, I don't need, so I called the office back. And I said, cancel the request for AA help. I don't need it anymore. And I really didn't. So it's under those conditions that he arrived. So he wasn't welcomed by me, but my family had other ideas, and they were all grabbing him and telling him what a bad father and husband and all that I was. And so off we went to a meeting in Manassas. And, we were just talking about Pete Nelson. And I think it was his 5th anniversary, and, Speedy Baker and Pinky, and some of these guys know the Manassas crowd. Old Fritz was making the coffee, and God, they had, it was a group anniversary in that old Oddfellows Hall with the toilets that didn't flush, and it stunk in there. It was just something, a space heater on the wall, and he had me sitting right in the front row, and that space heater would cut on and just blew hot air right at me. And God, everybody was so happy. They're celebrating in the group anniversary, and they had all these anniversary speakers, and then they had a buffet with all this food. And, the meeting started. I'd been sober about 4 hours. And the meeting goes on because it was a group anniversary, and it ended up with square dancing. So with the country fiddler. Spitty Baker had won the fiddle championship of the United States drunk a couple of times, and he was playing. And so now, and that meeting went on probably 5 hours, and so now I'm sober 9 hours. People are saying, "Isn't sobriety wonderful?" And I'm not connecting that well with that. It felt sobriety may be wonderful, but withdrawal is awful, and I'm going through that right now. So, and I was trying to make a break for it, but there was nowhere to break to. There was just this. We were on an alley, whatever that thing was. There was no streets. There was nowhere to go. It was just dark and rainy out, and I was standing outside. And this Al-Anon lady, Betsy Lynch, and she came up and just put her arm on my shoulder and said, "It's going to be all right." And I turned around and I believed her. I said, "Damnedest thing I ever felt was that Al-Anon lady saying it's going to be all right." And I just turned around and walked back in. And haven't had a drink since, so you never know what's going to happen around these programs. And so I'm very grateful to have the same sponsor for almost 40 years. And it's not a record. I just met somebody that's even longer than that, where you both have to stay alive and sober. I mean, that's the trick in pulling that off. Anyway, I did not plan anything. I don't know if Bobby did the same thing. We just said, we're just going to come here and see what comes out. And so he gave me a few ideas as he was talking. So I just thought in the first hour, I'm just going to tell some stories about AA. And then in the second hour, I'll just talk about about just spirituality and what I think it's all about in my own life. And so the story that I was thinking about, and I like, sometimes I like to start stories with "once upon a time." I don't know why, but they just don't do that anymore. It used to be all those little stories you'd open up and it would go, "Once upon a time there was a." So anyway, and see what you think of this story. Bobby was talking about this a little bit, but anyway, once upon a time, in a city not too far from here. Probably, I don't know, I can't do the math in my head, but let's say 160 years ago, there were 6 guys who drank in the same bar all the time. And these guys were very well respected citizens of this city. And they had succeeded in their lives even though they were still in their 20s. But they were alcoholics. And they saw the handwriting on the wall. They used to kid themselves that, my drinking's going to take me down. I'm going to lose my family and my business and everything. Give me another drink. I'll drink to my failure. I mean, that was about it. And they were drinking and drinking. And one of them said, "I wonder if we could keep each other sober." And the other guy said, "Yeah, there's a lot of temperance movements around. Why don't we write our own pledge?" Now this is being done at a bar. So the bartender, "Give me a pencil and a piece of paper." And so they wrote out a pledge. "I, so-and-so, here solemnly swear under the blah, 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 blah. I will never touch another drop of all the different kinds of malt liquor and whiskey and all that." And then signed it. And so then each one of them read this thing and announced that they now had this pledge and that they were going to not drink anymore. And boy, they made it through the week. And they decided to come back once a week and discuss how the week was going. And then they decided what they really needed to do was to get other people to sign the pledge. And we got to build up a head of steam. We got to get this thing and get it really exciting. So they just went around. Pretty soon they had maybe another 100 people. Sign up with us. One of the things that had people signing up was these guys were well known. You know what I mean? So you could be taking a step up in society if you could get in there. You know, maybe the bank guy would give you a loan. I mean, there was a sort of an ego attraction to this particular thing. And once it started growing a little bit, they decided, well, we better organize ourselves. This thing is catching on. And so they said, well, let's get a name. What do you think we ought to call ourselves? Well, we want to call ourselves something that will get everybody's attention. Let's name ourselves after the most famous guy in American history, President George Washington. So they did. They called themselves the Washingtonians, with our own little pledge. And Bobby was talking about the Washingtonians. And so they just picked one guy to be the president. Got to have presidents. So he was the president of the Baltimore Washingtonian Society. And then as they got more people, and it really started catching on. I mean, at the end of 1 year, they decided to have a parade in Baltimore to celebrate all the pledge guys that they got on the list, and they had something like 3,000 people in the parade. I mean, it was there was no anonymity. This was a big deal. I am proud to have signed this pledge. And the very inertia of this thing, just the, excitement of it was people were staying sober. So they assigned different guys to go to other cities, go up to New York City, go over to Washington, D.C., and starting up societies in these other, and this thing, it was just like a phenomenon, how fast this thing took off. And within 4 years, now the numbers, if you look back in the history, they do vary. Bobby mentioned 200,000, but there are other numbers that say it was 400,000. 400,000 members of a society that's only 4 years old. I think when AA was 4 years old, they probably had 500 people at the most. If you took that number, 400,000, it is a bigger percentage of the then American population than AA is today. That's how big the Washingtonians were. It was enormous. And there was no program. There was no religion allowed. You don't even mention God. We don't want any, they did have one good tradition, no political, no nothing. They had that, but they didn't stick by it. And, so here's this huge force. And they would have these annual huge get-togethers. And if you look, as somebody pointed out, if you look in the papers of Abraham Lincoln, he addressed this organization when he was still a lawyer out in Illinois. I'm just trying to set the stage that we really had a phenomenon going on. And that was in 1840. And by the end of the decade, there was no one left sober. It just disappeared off the planet. It was like a huge dirigible that caught on fire. It was just gone. Disappeared flat. Now part of it was there was really no program, and that it was being built up almost like a pyramid thing where the excitement of watching more people take the pledge, you know what I mean, and publicity. And so there was a lot of ego involved in it. But it also, once you get that big, there are forces in society that would like you to lend your power to their cause, which is another tradition where you don't endorse no opinion on outside issues. And so the temperance movement was coming, and they said, we want you to join us in this temperance. If it's good for you to stay sober, it will be good for everybody in the country. Then we ought to have no alcohol in the country. Blah, 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 blah. So they started getting involved a little bit in that. And then the slavery issue was coming up, and they said, certainly you can join in the abolition of slavery. I mean, you guys are then. They said, yeah, we're for that. We're going to get involved. And of course, they started taking these political positions. And when you combine all that with the actual lack of a program, it just started fragmenting. What are you doing that for? And we started disagreeing and taking our individuals' positions, and the whole thing disappeared. And the interesting thing is, this is how much it disappeared. That when Bill Wilson was writing the traditions, and they started talking about no opinion on outside issues or membership requirements and these type of things, someone said to him, you know what you ought to do? You ought to look into the history of the Washingtonians. You probably got some good lessons there. And he said, this is Bill, probably the leader on getting a sobriety movement going. He said, who were the Washingtonians? You see what I'm saying? In other words, it virtually disappeared from consciousness. It disappeared so fast. So if an organization that big can vanish so that nobody can even remember them, I think we can get an idea of how important the traditions are. Because we're no better off than any other drunk that's trying to stay sober. And those traditions are a tremendous lifeline that protect you and I and our groups and all of that. And they also, can apply to your own individual life. So it's such a blessing to have a presentation like that to see how important they are. It doesn't mean you got to go have a tradition meeting every week, where you're just studying all the traditions. Just find out what they are. And when you're conducting your own affairs and the group's affairs, you can go, where is some guidance on this? And I remember in the 70s, after Senator Hughes passed the law, got the law passed that made alcoholism a disease, they wanted to know what AA thought, and AA wrote them a letter and said that they didn't testify on issues like that because that was our policy. But later on, there was a senator on the Health and Human Services Committee who was introducing a bill that would have put warning labels on alcohol bottles similar to the warning labels on cigarettes. And we all know how much good that warning label has done. There's hardly anybody smoking anymore. But so they were having a hearing on it. And they were trying to get witnesses. Now, who would be a good witness to come down and tell us whether a warning label would be a good idea on a whiskey bottle other than AA? I mean, here is the greatest possible witnesses in the world are members of AA. They could go, you've almost died of drinking. Do you think a warning label would have stopped, your disease? So they got a hold of the General Service Office, asked if they could have a witness come down. So yeah, we'll be glad to send somebody down. So they sent somebody down. They didn't actually get in front of the committee, but the staff was interviewing them, and they said, for the record, what can we put in here? How does AA feel about warning labels? He said, Alcoholics Anonymous has no position whatsoever on warning labels on alcohol. And they said, that's it? He said, yep, that's it. And it was like, the reaction on the committee was like, what the heck was that? How could you not have an opinion? I mean, that's what Washington is based on. It's just the whole, what is your opinion on this? And you've got to have a way that it has to be. I mean, that's what being willful is. And there it was. And I think it did get in the record that the AA was contacted and they had no opinion whatsoever on that. But I'd like to follow up, just a way of getting a laugh, that individuals, that doesn't mean just because this group can't voice its opinion, each of us as an individual can have opinions on anything. You know what I mean? And so, if you'd like to know my opinion on warning labels on alcohol, I'll tell you what it is. Yes, there should be warning labels on alcohol, and I know exactly what the warning should say so that it'll do some good. It should say, warning, this bottle may run out. Right? You should consider buying two. We might not be home, drunk, out of booze, and getting back in the car, going out to get another bottle. So it might actually do some good. So anyway, I don't know where that was going. Then I was thinking of another story. And that is a story about early origins. And I don't know why, I just loved this story. And I remember somebody, when I was talking about Roland Hazard, that somebody, when he died, they sent me all of his clippings out of the newspaper, all the obituaries in different newspapers around the country. So I'll tell you about him. These are just stories that just pop into my head. Anyway, he was a son of a very wealthy family from Rhode Island. And the family had been in different types of businesses for generations and were extremely wealthy. You know, the whole Ivy League, New York, summers in Vermont, mansion out on Rhode Island, you know, Newport, and that environment. And the son, Roland, was the heir to take over all the businesses. He was also an alcoholic. And it was also before there was any alcohol programs. It was before AA. And so he would be, and he recognized it, and on his own he was trying to find some help. And so he went to whatever was available, and it wouldn't work. They had various detox type of treatments, and they had some hospitals like Towns Hospital in New York that were trying to find some answers, but none of them that were working. And as the years went by with this constant trying, it became apparent to him and to his father that he may never get the family business, that they may end up just institutionalizing him in order to keep him alive for his own safety. So as a last resort, they decided that there was a man in Switzerland named Carl Jung who was world renowned, a very famous psychiatrist, and that if anybody could possibly save their son, it would be him, and spare no expense. So he went to Switzerland for a year. I mean, that is a long haul. And saw Dr. Jung on a weekly basis. And Dr. Jung was attempting to cause a personality transformation that would enable Roland to see the world differently, and then there would be no necessity for drinking. So that was really the goal that Dr. Jung had in mind. And at the end of a year, he said to him, I have done everything that I can possibly do for you. And you understand your situation, that if you do go back to drinking, it's probably going to be an institution. I understand. Yes, I do. And he got as far as Paris when someone asked him the wrong question. They said, would you like a drink? And he said, well, yeah, actually I would. And now that you bring it up, and ended up drunk again. I mean, it was a very short order. And so he just went right back to Switzerland and saw Dr. Jung again. And whenever I see that meeting, I think of when we read chapter 5 and we get to the ABCs at the end of chapter 5, and it says that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. I think we saw that right there, that we could put that down. There's Roland. He's out, and can he manage his own? He couldn't even get from Switzerland back to New York. Obviously he can't manage his own life. But we need one other thing in order to enter the spiritual world. And that's the B in there. You remember what that says? No human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Now, if there was anything that symbolized human power, it was Carl Jung. And we've tried all the human power in the United States, there's one last guru of human power left on the planet, and it's Dr. Jung. And guess what Dr. Jung said to Roland when he came back? He said the magic words that created, and Bill gave him credit later. If you want to see the creation of Alcoholics Anonymous and spirituality for us alcoholics, is when the human power stood and said to Roland these immensely humble words. There's nothing I can do for you. There. I mean, that's pretty heavy reality. In other words, there is no court of higher appeal. We have to deflate ego in depth. And there it was. I mean, you're my only hope, doctor. There's nothing I can do for you. That engendered a surrender, which is the theme of this conference. It's the key to everything, of such a depth that he almost fainted. I mean, it was just like, it's like the death sentence being sounded. This is the ticket to freedom. Unless that happens, we don't go anywhere. So each one of us has to have our meeting with Dr. Jung and have him look at us, because we go in there going, oh yeah, Roland Hazard, sure. But my case is different. So doctor, I would like you to analyze my case. And he does, and he goes, there's nothing I can do for you. So we really have had that be right there, that no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And then what did Dr. Jung say? He didn't just say that. He let that sink in. He let it go down to his core. And then he said, I have read of a few cases where people, alcoholics just like you, have gone out and sought a spiritual program, a spiritual solution. And if they found it, they were able to stay happy and sober. If I was you, I'd go look for one of those. My point is that if he hadn't prefaced it with, there's nothing I can do, if he had just said, you really ought to try a spiritual program, we wouldn't be as motivated to go find one. I mean, see the essential ingredient. In other words, he didn't tell them how great spiritual programs were. He said, unless there is a spiritual program, it's over. So it's a new way to get spiritual. And you're going to see this in the big book later on when I'm talking about it. We have the same approach here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so that led Roland into going, spiritual programs, where the hell are they? I mean, so now he's talking to people. Is there any spiritual programs around? Up until then, he had no interest in spiritual programs whatsoever. You couldn't have interested him in that. Oh yeah, very nice. Yeah, good. Go ahead. So it was one of these things where talking about putting first things first, spiritual programs went from an unknown to top priority. And the hot spiritual program at the time was the Oxford groups. That Lutheran minister named Frank Buckman, who got fed up with organized religion. He said, we had this great teacher who showed up here a couple thousand years ago, and his message is wonderful, but the people that are in charge of it are screwing it all up. So we're going to eliminate the middleman, and we're going to meet in our little homes. We don't need these big churches and all these guys, and we're just going to meet in our homes, and we can talk about these principles, and we can become better spiritual people on our own by helping each other. Sound familiar? But they weren't specializing in drunks. This is just people who wanted to be better citizens. And boy, that thing just caught on. It went all over the place. And one of the big promoters, as he went through England, Oxford University sent him off to Africa to spread this thing. And when they arrived there, they said, oh, you're the Oxford guys. And that's where the nickname Oxford movement came from, was having been sent over there. Later on, Oxford grabbed the name back. But for for quite a few years, that's where it was. And so this movement had really caught on. And Roland found an Oxford group back in the States. He joined it. He was down in New York and got sober. And it was just amazing. Now, he summered in Manchester, Vermont. And Manchester, Vermont was the place, if you go there, you'll see all these summer homes. They're absolutely beautiful. They're just like wonderful places. And down the street, about 5 miles from there, is an entirely different neighborhood. There aren't any fancy homes down in East Dorset. This was a marble quarry area, and that's where Bill Wilson was born. And so he grew up, just this far away from all of the big bucks, and then looking at it over there. And he ended up, because of his grandfather, going to the Burr and Burton Academy, which was a private school in Manchester. And even though he was from the other side of the tracks, he saw what was going on there, and he liked that side of the tracks. He saw him out on the golf courses, and he saw the fancy cars, and he really liked it. And so he milled around in that crowd and actually knew Roland. And he also knew Ebby Thatcher, who became Bill's sponsor. And Ebby was from a family in Albany, New York, where his father was the mayor. And they have a big park up there. It's a Thatcher Park. I mean, the Thatcher family was sort of the name in Albany, New York. And their son Ebby was a wonderful guy, except he was an alcoholic. And he and Bill got in a lot of trouble. They were great drinking buddies. They did a lot of marvelous stunts together. They got a drunken pilot. When the Manchester airport was due to open, there was all this stuff in the paper, and Bill is telling his buddy, the Manchester airport's going to open soon. We ought to be the first plane to land at it. And so they said, yeah, you know how to be guaranteed to be the first plane to land at a new airport? Land before it opens. So they got a pilot friend of theirs who was drunk as hell, and they called from Albany and announced that they were going to land at the Manchester airport. And so they had some down people out in the press and all that. And they flew in and landed the day before the airport was to open. And the plane rolled out and they stopped. And all three of them came out of the plane and just fell on the ground drunk and just were lying there. And so they wrote this up in the local paper. So these are, it doesn't sound like a good story, but when it's your story and you go, hey, Ebby, let's talk about the time we flew into, you can just see where that must have been a lot of fun to reminisce these things. And so we had these childhood acquaintances and friendships being developed there in Manchester. And there was one other character that showed up there, and it's funny how here's these kids, the teenagers. And there was one other. There was this lovely young woman whose father was a doctor from Brooklyn, Dr. Burnham, and they had a summer home. And it was Lois Burnham, who Bill fell in love with, and they got married, and she started Al-Anon. So anyway, this group is there, and the first one, as I mentioned, was Roland, and the second one was Ebby. And Ebby had, his family finally made an arrangement with him. They said, Ebby, that summer home in Manchester? It's a beautiful big home. He said, yeah, it's great. We're going to give it to you. Really? But there's a catch. What's that? You're not allowed to come back to Albany. Ever. Because that's where we're running for political office, and we don't need this sun showing up in the middle of campaigns. You stay in Manchester, we'll send you a monthly stipend, do whatever the heck you want, but do not come to Albany. And so he agreed. And so he's partying, doing all these things, and he crashed a car one day into the farmhouse, asked the housewife for a cup of coffee when his car pulled into the kitchen. And so that put him in jail. And then the thing that started his whole career with sobriety involved, one day he was looking at the family home and he said, this thing looks awful. I haven't done any work on this house in years. It needs to be painted, and I'm going to paint it. And I remember doing this myself. I'm going to paint this house. And so I went out, got a bottle, and then went to the paint store, got the paint, got the ladder, had everything. And then I got it home, and then I would drink and think about painting the house. It was just sort of, I'm picturing how it's going to look. And he actually got, maybe 30 square feet painted. And then he got a little lawn chair, and he kind of sat there watching the paint dry and drinking and imagining the rest of the house painted. And you feel that sense of accomplishment as this imaginary paint job is being done. And some pigeons or birds flew by and crapped on his fresh paint. And he saw that and decided he better protect the paint until it got completely dry. So he went in and got a couple shotguns and sat out there waiting for any birds to come by, and started blasting away with the shotguns and drinking the booze. And the neighbors are going, what's all the gunshots in the neighborhood, and so the constable is over, and Ebby's up in front of the judge, and the judge is going, Ebby, you're in here a lot of times. We're going to have to do some heavy-duty stuff now because they're all over me. And they don't want, now the gun, that's going too far. And Roland Hazard and a couple of other Oxford groupers had heard about this. They knew. And they asked the judge if they would release Ebby in their personal care. And the judge realized, man, the Hazard family, I will never be criticized for releasing Ebby in the care of that family. He said he agreed, and they brought Ebby into the Oxford group. Ebby got sober, and he ended up down in New York with Sam Shoemaker, and they're doing their work in the mission and, helping out with feeding people, and then going to these meetings and talking about God and spirituality. And Ebby got thinking about Bill Wilson, his old drinking buddy, and he said, God, this would be perfect for Bill. I haven't talked to him in years. I think I'll call him up. And then we all know he called up, and Bill's right at the bottom. He's already been hospitalized a couple times. And Ebby plays the call on him and is describing God and religion and all this wonderful stuff. And Bill's feeling sorry for him, and he's hoping, don't worry, Ebby, that'll go away. You could be able to drink again. It's not permanent. You're going to be all right. But he planted the idea. It's funny, we give the credit for this, and I know all the history books do, that the idea of God as you understand him from Jim V, and manuscript indicates that, and it all happened that way. But what Ebby said to Bill right in that first visit was, Bill didn't like the idea of God, and Ebby said, well, choose any concept of God you want. Which is really, the same suggestion that has been the savior of AA. What a beautiful sentence. Otherwise, most of us wouldn't be here if they had defined this God, because we were not into definitions of God. It's like, no. But it was awful hard to go, you want to believe in God? Yeah, any God you want. It was hard to go, any God I want? No, that's no good. How do you fight that? On what basis do you say my ideas are no good, so I'm not going to accept that? It becomes, okay, I'll hang around, and so we get to stay. And so that got Bill in. So that was kind of this fascinating chain of events that came out of the teenagers meeting there and going over to see Dr. Jung. Now, many years later, in 1961, Bill Wilson now saw AA all around the world and saw the miracles that had taken place, and he suddenly realized that he had never told Dr. Jung the critical role, the crucial role that he had played in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, so he decided to write him a letter. And it was good that he wrote him, because I think he wrote him in January, and Dr. Jung wrote him back in March, and in June, Dr. Jung died. So that exchange of letters never would have taken place if it hadn't popped into Bill's mind. And so he wrote him saying, I don't know if you remember Roland Hazard, I don't know if you know that or whatever, but this is what happened as a result of what you told him. And he went on to tell him all about AA, and the world now has sober alcoholics and blah, blah, blah. And thank you so much for being the crucial starter of this whole process. And so Dr. Jung got the letter, and then he wrote Bill back. And they publish these in the Grapevine every so often. It's just fascinating to look at. And what Dr. Jung said, yeah, I do remember him now. And as a matter of fact, my evaluation of alcoholics led me to conclude that the only possible way of dealing with that particular illness was through a profound personality transformation, much like a spiritual experience. That was the only thing that was ever going to lay a glove on that particular problem. And he said, back when Roland came to see me, I would have been laughed out of my profession if I had started mentioning spirituality or God or anything like that as a psychiatrist, because it was just not there yet. But now, in the 60s, it's safe for me to freely say what I was thinking back then, which has to do with spirituality. And he went on to say that the way he saw alcoholism, what was it that made a person an alcoholic? What was the fundamental conflict, the fundamental disease that was inside? And in paraphrasing his words, it was, an alcoholic has an inordinate longing for God. And it's there. And they don't know what it is. They just know something is wrong inside of them. And they go, I don't know what it is, but there's something missing inside of me. There's something not right. There's something wrong inside. And it's strong enough that they are seeking a way of addressing this situation. They're seeking to address it. Now, it's present in everybody, but it appears to be stronger for some unknown reason. Somebody's just really looking to fix this problem. And alcohol appears to fix it. It absolutely matches the problem. It comes into our system as a chemical and transforms the world that we live in, and that fundamental thing is fixed for the first time in our lives. It is such a powerful experience that we're willing to pay a very heavy price in order to stay with it. Now, we don't know this. We just think we're catching a buzz like the guy next to us in high school. We don't have a clue that any of this is going on. Party, party, party. And if somebody came up and said, oh, I see you're seeking God, we'd go, hey. I don't think so, man. And so, I'm going to end this session soon. When we get to where people are suggesting that we don't drink, we naturally go, what? Why would I not drink? When I'm not drinking is when I have the problem. You talk to a non-alcoholic, they don't know what you're talking about. It's when I have no alcohol in my system that my core problem manifests itself. That's when I'm acutely aware that there's something wrong with me and that I don't fit in, and that I don't know what it is. But alcohol fixes it. So you're asking me to spend the rest of my life in pain when you ask me to not drink. And that's why, people say, you just stop drinking, you'll be fine. And we go, I don't think so. That's not the answer. You see what I mean? So that's why alcoholics go, what are you talking about? Stop drinking. What happens when you don't drink? You're sober all the time. All the time. Day after week, after month, after year, never a break. From what? What do you want to break from? This. Well, what is that? So we go to the shrinks. Doc, I got this. Oh, that's a childhood, blah, 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 blah. Forgive your mother and move on. Okay. Right? And so we go, Mother, you're forgiven. And maybe for half an hour it just feels wonderful. And then, no, that's not it. Okay, join a health club. You gotta work out. You gotta get in shape. You gotta get that. And we go do it. We are doers. We go, I'm in shape. Look at me. How do you feel? Great. Oh, it's bad. God, I've still got this thing, even with a forgiven mother and in perfect shape. I'm running a marathon, and this thing is going, bro, it's still, you're screwed up. You haven't fixed it yet. Well, what else is it? Well, you don't have enough money. That's it, money. I'm going to succeed. And then we go pursuing, and I am somebody. It ought to be fixed. It's there. Well, I'm not getting enough sex. There's all the sex therapists. There's your problem. You're repressing your sexual desires. Yeah, that's it. All right, give me a... I'm glad they finally got around to the real problem that I have. I'm not a sex fiend. I'm just following doctor's orders. So, we could go on and on and on how many fixes, drugs. Oh, that's the wrong drug. I'm glad I never get into drugs because I understand now. They go, oh no, I just mixed the new formula. This one's never been tried by anybody. So this could be the answer to that. We all know what I'm pointing at when I say that. It is your personal angst. It's your personal, and it's been there forever. And so that's what we spend the rest of our life. Now, the funny thing is, when we're 6 years old, at some point somebody said, by the way, you need God in your life. It's almost like, here's the way life works. It's going to be a big mystery, and you're going to go out there trying to solve this mystery. But before you go out, we're going to tell you the answer to the mystery. Okay, go ahead. So we go out and they say, well, they already told me the answer to the mystery, but this isn't the problem. So you see what's happened. We've just misdiagnosed the problem the whole time. We've thought it was money. We thought it was sex. We thought it was inadequacy. We thought it was, I'm not in shape. We thought And we come into Alcoholics Anonymous and they go, if you follow this path, you're going to have a connection with a power greater than yourself. And if your experience is like ours, as you make that connection, this is going to disappear. That's all the program says. If you will try this, this will disappear. Because it disappeared in me, it disappeared in him, it disappeared in her. And do you see that you are like, that's why we tell our stories. It's like, God, I'm just like him. And it disappeared in him, that really went away. This is the freedom of the program, is to have that disappear, but it only disappears one day. See, there's no permanent fix. But we were used to that. Bobby was talking about it earlier. You can't drink enough today to last all week. You remember that? You had to go back to the bar the next day. Yeah, I'm in again. What's the problem? I'm sober. We never told the bartender that. But if we were honest, we'd go, hey, I'm sober again. Give me that stuff. That's better. I like operating from here. a lot better than where I was 3 minutes ago. This is where I belong, with a power inside of me enabling me to see the world differently. And so isn't it funny how this whole story unfolds as we see all the way back? You know, those guys were close in 1840. They were really close. And somehow these people, you know, that Roland Hazard, I mean, who would have thought this guy? And then those teenagers all meeting each other. And then all these things. So when we absorb all this, and it took me, you know, I must have had 25 years before I was really interested in history. Maybe 20 years. But boy, about 5 years ago, I was up in East Dorset in Manchester, and I went to where that airport was. There is no airport there, but there's a field where the airport was. And I had to climb up from a parking lot to get up there. And they're teaching people how to operate graders, you know, the big road graders, because they got this wide open area. There's a little tiny private field with a few Piper Cubs over in the corner. But I stood on that field, and I could see Bill and Ebby and whoever the pilot was coming in and rolling out on the ground and laughing. And then later on in sobriety going, remember when we went up to Manchester and opened the airport? And laughing because it was over. That's why we laugh at all of this. See, we're not doing that anymore. And I saw Burton Academy, which is now the local high school. So the kids are going to this beautiful stone buildings and all of that. And that's where he went to school. And I saw the 2 golf courses that he joined. And I got a T-shirt from one of them. And I went down to the graveyard and went down to Bill's graveyard is so obscure and way behind, off the beaten path. And it's just, you know, you have to know where you're going to get there. And you go in there, and I'll bet you could go almost any time of year. And you'll go, hey, there's another car in here. I'll tell you who's there. It's another drunk. And just wanted to walk over to the grave, and there's only one grave in there that there's no grass growing on, because there's somebody standing in front of it all the time. And people throw their chip there. I left my 25-year chip the first time I went there, and guys over in they've restored the inn where Bill was born, and they go collect the coins at the end of the day and bring them back over. And you just stand there in those mountains, and you understand that this was not something that human beings thought up. That somewhere something said, you know, those alcoholics have been hanging around here for thousands of years, and they're nice people, and they really are on a quest. Maybe we ought to just help them a little bit. So we're just going to throw this little bunch of coincidences out there, and we are the recipients of whatever that energy was. And we should count our blessings and celebrate the fact that our true natures were finally touched, so that we understand what the problem was. And in the next hour, I want to talk a little more about what the solution really is. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back. Thank you. We were talking about the Oxford group. So I'm going to tell you what it felt like if you were going to get sober in an Oxford group meeting in Akron. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you how they got there, because it involves Fort Myers, Florida, which is near where I live. And there was Thomas Edison had a guy working for him by the name of Jim Newton. And he was a very good manager. He was also a real estate salesman. And I'm drawing a blank on the estate in Akron, the rubber company out there. Huh? Firestone. And Harvey Firestone was a big buddy with Thomas Edison, and he said, I'm looking for somebody to be my executive assistant. And Thomas Edison said, Jim Newton is your guy. Jim Newton is your guy. Come on down to Fort Myer and I'll introduce you to him. And they hit it off, so he hired him on the spot. And he brought him back to Akron. And Jim Newton had joined the Oxford movement in Fort Myer and loved what it had done to his personal life. And he had also observed that a few alcoholics who came into the Oxford movement got sober. Just his own observation. And it turned out that one of Firestone's sons was an alcoholic. And Newton saw this and went to the father and said, what if I take your son with me? I'm going to a big Oxford convention back east, and I think it could really help him. So he took his son back there, and it did help him. And he came back all inspired and sober and everything. And so the father said, what is this Oxford thing? They said, oh, it's and so he just got so excited about it that he wanted to have one of these unbelievable Oxford weekends. And he got all the Frank Buckman, the founder of it, and all the celebrities that were in it. And it was a big deal in Akron. And it made all the papers. And it was almost like, the whole town is going, wow, it's like the circus coming down. It was that big a deal because it was in the papers. And, if Firestone is endorsing it, must be awesome. So all kinds of people went to it that wouldn't normally go to anything like that. And guess who two of the people that went? Dr. Bob and Ann Smith. And Henrietta Seiberling. All the characters that put AA together on the other end of the coin out in Akron got there because of that particular coincidence that, Newton gets recommended by Thomas Edison to Firestone, and he just happened to have been in the Oxford group and happened to notice that some alcoholics got sober. Anyway, if you were going to an Oxford meeting back then and you were an alcoholic, they would talk to you ahead of time. And as a matter of fact, once it got started in Akron, you went through Dr. Bob's hospital for 5 days so that you could get detoxed. And then they'd talk to you and your wife, and they would go, I think you're ready. I think we can get you there. And then the two of you would show up in the living room of the people that are holding the Oxford group meeting, and you'd sit in the main room, and they'd say a few prayers, and they'd talk about what Oxford group was and how we operate. And when the elders, we'd call them sponsors now, determined that you looked ready, two of them would come over and they'd say, come with us upstairs. We're going upstairs. And they'd take you upstairs, and it was a very simple process of getting, so they speeded it up a little bit compared to the way we do it. They just said, okay, do you believe in God? I mean, that's right there. You know what I mean? Like, do you believe in God? And the guy said, well, I'm not sure. Well, you better. Okay, I believe. Well, get on your knees. And then they'd pray, and then they'd pick them up, and they'd say, okay, let's go back downstairs. Now that sounds like, boy, that would never work. It was working like a charm. I mean, isn't that funny how see, that's what we need, and it really was the answer. They just got there quicker. And so that was really how it went. And as a matter of fact, when I'll just do one more history thing and then talk about, I just have 2 points I want to talk about on spirituality anyway. And that is one of my heroes. And this is a guy who I hated because I hadn't studied about him. I just heard a couple of things, and that was Clarence Snyder, the brewmeister in the big book. And, Clarence, he always broke his anonymity. And for him, there was only one higher power, JC. And he just made no buns about it. It wasn't God as I understand him. We don't need that part. It's JC. And so with those 2 strikes against him, I just didn't want to pay much attention, but now that I've studied his history, I go, what a great guy, and boy, did he add a lot to AA. And so I've changed my mind. I think it was wonderful. But anyway, I'm going to tell you just very briefly, he got sober because through an amazing coincidence, he's in New York City, where his wife had sent him as an assistant on a truck driver who was a relative of hers, and he thought if he was on a truck the whole time, he couldn't drink. You know what I mean? So that's why he's in New York City. And while he's there, a friend of his wife, like a cousin, tells his wife that that she has a doctor friend in New York who has heard about a cure for alcoholism. And that why doesn't Clarence go see this guy? And do you know who the guy was? It was Bill's sister's husband, Leonard Strong, who played a big role, who introduced Bill to Rockefeller. But it's such a small world that his sister's husband, right there in New York, knew of Dr. Bob. And he told Clarence, when you get to Akron, go see Dr. Bob Smith in the hospital out there, which he did. And Clarence was from Cleveland. So he came down, went 5 days through the thing at the Dr. Bob's to physically get well, and then over to the Oxford group, and up in the room, do you believe in God? Blah, blah, blah. Now, you weren't a member of this fledgling organization. They sort of had an alcoholic squad within the Oxford group. They hadn't broken yet. And you weren't really a member until you found somebody to sober up. You follow what I'm saying? When you showed up with it, you had to go out and find one on the streets. And then you were accepted as a member. Yeah, you're a member now because you found somebody and you talked them into getting sober. So that was, so Clarence went back. And he was just going to be the greatest sober-upper in the world, and he ended up probably breaking a lot of records of the number of people gotten sober. And he would go out on the streets and find people lying there. Hey, I want to tell you about God. You want to come over here? No. And he finally came up to a guy who had alcoholic paralysis, which you don't hear much about anymore. Alcoholic paralysis is where you've drank so much that your muscles can't work, but you're still conscious. And Clarence saw that as the perfect prospect. The guy had no choice but to listen to him. So he's telling him all about, we got this program, you don't have to do that, wouldn't you want to try this? And the guy finally said, all right, I will try it. He said, can you get $40? Which is a lot of money then. Because that's what it costs to go through Dr. Bob's hospital. He said, no, I don't have $40, but my mother, if she ever knew about this, she would be glad to give the $40. Well, where's your mother? Well, she's out about 30 miles from here, out in the country. Well, give me the address, and I'm going to go get it. I'll tell her about you, and she'll give me the $40. Yeah, she'll give you the $40. So he went and borrowed a car from somebody else on Skid Row, drove out to this place. He said he got out there, the road ended, and it was like a trail going in to where this person was. And hunting season had opened, and there were people shooting all around. He was thinking twice about even going, but he finally gets to this place, and he knocks on the door, and this elderly woman comes to the door, and he starts explaining, that I'm Sir Clarence and your son and this. And when he say her son's name, her eyes would light up. But he soon discovered that she only spoke Polish. And so he's sitting there trying to explain in English to this Polish lady about her son, and he's going nowhere, when a granddaughter showed up at about 7 years old who had learned English in kindergarten and first grade. And so through the granddaughter, he translates to the mother the situation, and as soon as she understood it, she ran back in and got all kinds of, some of those big bills. Remember the big bills we had, and before the dollar bill was shrunk down and the currency was much bigger, and brought out much more than 40 and was willing to give him whatever it took to go get her son. And he went back, took the 40, went back and got him down there, and this is how he 12-stepped, and he got that guy sober, and pretty soon he had a whole bunch of drunk sober. And he became a car salesman. They gave him 2 demonstrators. He was such a good car salesman. And he used the 2 demonstrators to bring his entire squad down from Cleveland. This was the entire contingent from Cleveland going to the weekly Oxford group meeting in Akron. And it turns out that out of the 10 guys, 7 were Catholics. And the Catholics came back to their churches, and they were sober, and they're doing well. And the priests were coming up to them, and they're going, "Hattie, what's the deal? You look wonderful." "Oh, Father, I'm sober." "Wonderful. How'd you do that?" "I'm in the Oxford group down in Akron." Well, the Oxford group is a Protestant organization, and that is not looked upon favorably by the Catholic Church. So the priests are now squeezing these guys to get out of that Oxford movement. And Clarence is sort of the referee in between. He's going, well, if they stop going, they're not going to stay sober. And then finally they kept going, and finally they said, we're going to excommunicate you. So now the dilemma that they're in. And so he came up, he brought somebody down. And on the way back, the wife said, if you want to start a meeting in Cleveland, use my house. So he said, I'm going to start a meeting, and we're not going to call it Oxford. And then we can practice these principles, and these guys won't get excommunicated. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous had just come out. And he said to himself, I'll call it AA. And so he went back and told Dr. Bob, he said, I'm going to start this other meeting for these guys so they don't get excommunicated up in Cleveland. And they said, no, you can't separate from this. It'll screw up the whole thing. You're going to ruin the entire program. And they're trying to talk him out of it. He said, no, I'm going ahead. It'll be next Thursday. So next Thursday, the Akron contingent came up trying to stop the meeting, but they held it. And that was the first meeting that used the name AA. But they had meetings in Bill's house that was separate from the Oxford. So Clarence always ran around the country saying that he founded AA. And that upset a few people. But I just wanted to tell that story. Now I'm going to talk about just a couple of spiritual things that I have found interesting in recent years. And one of them, and Steve, you were so kind to give me that book about the spirituality of imperfection. And this drives more of us nuts, that we think we're working a good program, and then we screw up, and then we go, well, I haven't gotten angry at anybody, and then, God, yesterday, I can't believe what I did. And then you go and you get a big whip, and you beat yourself up for about 20 minutes. For not being perfect. And there is a sentence in the 12 and 12 that I've been fascinated with. And this sentence appears in the 6th step. And the sentence is, this is the riddle of our existence. So the first thing I want to talk about is the riddle of our existence. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is the realm of the spirit. And then I'm going to sit down. Now, here's the context of the riddle of our existence. If you recall, it's the 6th step. Says we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And then it goes on to say, this is the step that separates the men from the boys, the girls from the women. Why would this step separate? What's the problem here? Of course we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Everybody's ready to have all. Why is that a hard step? And then as you start reading the step, it turns out we're almost ready to have God remove all these defects of character. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to almost want God to remove all these defects of character. And Bill goes on, well, why would we be like that? Well, would anybody in here like to see the federal deficit obliterated? Oh, yeah, everybody raise your hand. Good. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to cut your program, raise your taxes, cut your program, raise your taxes, and you go, whoa. I like the idea, but it's the specifics that I'm having a problem with. So of course I like the idea of having all my character defects removed. It's when I get specific, I waver a little bit. Would you like to have 100% of your lust removed? Yes, 100%. What the hell is that? Like you get no sex? Is that it? No sex? Zero? Okay, I'd like most of my lust removed. I would like most of my lust removed. Okay, what about greed? Would you like all of your greed gone? Then you would never think about yourself and getting anything. Never think about myself and getting anything. I'd like to get most of my greed removed, as a matter of fact. I'd like to get that. And so as we start making the list, we're toning down the extremity of this step. Don't you think it's kind of an extreme step? I mean, think, if you had all your character defects removed, you'd be like Mother Teresa. Who the hell wants to be like Mother Teresa? Do you want to be like Mother Teresa? You give all your shit away and just hang around people and help them all day? Is that what you want? So I'm going, whoa, we don't want to get, what if it's all gone and then you're there? I'd like to be mistaken for Mother Teresa. That would be Do you see the problem with the sixth step? They're talking about perfection. Perfection? Nobody, have you ever seen a perfect human? Nobody can achieve perfection. That's a joke. It can't be done. And then Bill goes, well, let's see if we can find an example somewhere of this principle working. Let me see if there was something in your life that you became entirely willing to have removed, and it was removed. What about your drinking? And then we go, Didn't you become entirely willing to have God take that away? And didn't He take it when you humbly asked? Isn't it totally gone? So we can no longer rest on the theory that it doesn't work. You see what I mean? We're caught in a box now. This is what he writes in the 12 and 12. Having been granted a perfect release from alcoholism, why can't we summon the same desire to have the other character defects removed? This is the riddle of our existence. So then he goes on, the answer to this may only be in the mind of God. But he speculates as to what it might be. And what it might be is the other defects are not fatal in the sense that alcoholism was killing us. And so our very nature could go against our instinctual drives and say, I don't care what, I'm totally willing to have that removed. But as far as the other character defects are concerned, we're going to have to settle for as much perfection as we can get. We're going to have to spend the rest of our lives trying to move further along, which means we're always going to be caught in the spirituality of imperfection. We're going to have to learn to be happy and comfortable with the deal that you can't get perfect. And so you see the importance of being able to do that is where serenity is going to come from. Where you're going to be able to say, I am trying very hard and still failing. And that's the way the deal is set up, and I can accept that. Now this is freedom. Freedom from that voice that's telling you got to be the exception. You should never get mad. You should never forget something. You should never... So there's a sentence in there that says, desires will always be found which oppose the grace of God. And that's because these instinctual drives, which are the basis of the character defects, are also necessary for us to stay alive. They were put in us so that we'll reproduce and take care of ourselves and form societies and all of that. But as Bill writes in there, those are not the purpose of being alive, and they also cannot be managed by us. So without a higher power, those drives will always dominate us. And that's the frustration of not being able to build character on your own. I'm trying to rise above myself by myself. That's an egocentric person. You've got to rise above yourself. Oh, I'll do it. You know what I mean? Now your problem is self-centeredness. Yes, it is. And I'll fix it. You see what I mean? We just never want to be out of the driver's seat. We just don't want to. So we learn that we're going to have to become God-centered. And even when we become God-centered, we're still going to be struggling with, I'm still not there. I still have these thoughts. I still have this, that, and I still have that. And you go, that's right. Now get comfortable with it. And it's getting comfortable with the dynamics of not being able to achieve perfection that gives us peace of mind. Now I think that's the riddle of the existence. I know this isn't for somebody in their first week of sobriety, but it is a crucial lesson that eventually we all have to learn. So I'm just throwing that out. If you ever want to have a fun thinking about the riddle of our existence, go look in the sixth step and see that it's a fascinating thing to think about, and maybe you can let yourself off the hook and have a much more happy sobriety as a result of that. You can't get there. So just keep struggling to get there, but you can't. There'll always be something more. There was a prayer in the 24-hour day book. Just think about this. This is what I'm going to ask God for. God, I would like to never be satisfied with my spiritual condition. That's a funny thing to pray for. God, please keep me upset all the time. I mean, you see what... But that describes the spirituality of imperfection. I pray that I may never be satisfied so that I'm always moving spiritually, but today I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, so I'm going to have the best day in the world. So simultaneously, I'm not content and content at the same time. And that's what spirituality is all about. It's filled with paradoxes. It's possible to experience joy in the middle of sadness. That's a very important lesson to learn. It's still there. You can still tap into it. You're going, I'm just experiencing sadness, but I'm so joyful that I'm alive experiencing sadness. I mean, there aren't events that happen where they have to wipe you out for 6 months. You can be both as we go through these things, so we can now fear adversity less. What's it going to be like if my husband died? What's it going to be happening if I lost one of my kids? What is going to happen? Oh, it's going to be devastating and rewarding at the same time. You can show another mother how to handle the loss of a child with dignity and grace. You have a tremendous role to play in this. Boy, when you look at it that way, you can experience the devastation and simultaneously the passing on of something that may help somebody at the same time. You're in a whole different world. And so this is what I think are some of the lessons that are in here. Then the other one is in the 10th step in the big book. And it comes from the promises. And then there's a sentence as we're walking into the 10th step. And it says we're now entering the world of the Spirit. Earlier in the book, Bill calls it the realm of the Spirit. So now we've done the work back here. We've finally done all the steps to settle with the past. We're coming into 10, 11, and 12, which is the now. I believe that the world of the Spirit is the now. That's the only place that the Spirit exists. The only place to have conscious contact with a higher power, which brings serenity, is right this second. If you're anywhere other than right here in this second, then you can't be in contact with this incredible, wonderful power. So anytime that we're going through a day and we get disturbed, we have a resentment or we're frightened about tomorrow or whatever we have, we've just left the world of the Spirit. Bye. Now I'm on my own again. It ain't me and my higher power, it's just me. Because I have this resentment and I'm not going to get rid of it. So it's just going to be me for a long time. And now I'm going to behave in a terrible fashion. I'm going to have amends to make later on. So this whole world of the Spirit is the now. And there is the reason I want to read this sort of backwards is that there's our verbs that are used to describe, that Bill uses to describe spirituality. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that if we enter this, we come out of the ninth step, we go through the promises, and we're in this world of the Spirit where we have an undisturbed relationship with a higher power. It transforms the way the world looks. And if you recall how he describes freedom from alcohol in that step, it says, we're neither cocky nor afraid. Isn't that what it is, Bob? We're neither cocky nor afraid. We feel as if we've been placed in a position of neutrality. We feel as if the problem has been removed. These are not psychiatric terms. Do you ever go to a psychiatrist? He says, don't worry, I'll put you in a position of neutrality. What's that, a nut ward? I mean, these are spiritual places, positions of neutrality. The problem has been removed. It's only removed while that envelope is open, while we're in that relationship with the higher power. So I came up with, as a way of refreshing our memory, what happens if we don't maintain that? You remember, that's the other thing in the 10th step. What we really have is the daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So what I'm saying is, and I wrote them down, that if you don't do this, you're going to encounter the threats. Now I'm just making this up, so relax. These are the threats of Alcoholics Anonymous. Are you ready? If we are not painstaking about this phase of our development, we will become disillusioned before we're halfway through. We are going to lose our new freedom and our new happiness. We will detest the past and will attempt to shut the door on it. We will lose any comprehension of the word serenity, and we will lack peace. As we slide further down the scale, we will see how our experience is of no use to anyone. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will reappear. We will gain interest in selfish things and lose interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip back in. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will worsen. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will return. We will no longer be able to handle situations because they now baffle us. We will suddenly realize that nothing is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant threats? We think not. They're being imposed on us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we fail to work to prevent them. And so you can see when it says What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on our spiritual condition. That's what it's talking about. It's saying, if you maintain this, then you'll have the promises. And when you look at the promises, have you noticed the verbs in the promises? Again, I'm just saying, these are only spiritual verbs. I mean, just think about it. You said, what is one of your problems, sir? Self-seeking. And so I'm just always self-seeking. It's all about me. Don't worry. It's going to slip away. It's just going to slip away. Well, I have this tremendous fear of people and economic insecurity. Don't worry. When you're not looking, it's going to leave you. I mean, what is that? It's going to leave you. That's a spiritual solution. You're not trying to get it to leave you. You're trying to get closer to your higher power. You're working these steps with only one jackpot in mind. Conscious contact. Conscious contact. So what does conscious contact mean? It means the promises. That's what contact produces. You see, it is intrinsic in the solution, is the loss of fear of economic insecurity and a sense of well-being and intuitively knowing. And all of these spiritual terms that come not in any explainable way, but simply because you're standing closer to your higher power. When you stand there, the problems don't exist. When you back off, they all come back. You know what it's like? Drinking. That's just how it is. You walk into a bar with 15 problems. You have 3 drinks. Name the 15 problems. Hey, who's got a problem? I don't have a problem. Buy a round of drinks. Follow what I'm saying? The solution was in the closeness to booze. Booze was the solution. It fixed everything. And this is the same thing here. The solution is in the closeness. When you're there are no problems. When you're far away from them, everything's a problem. You see, so no individual problem gets solved. Like we go, well, what do you do about financial insecurity? Well, you set up a savings account, you do this and you do that, and you work 2 jobs, and then you put the vehicle. Okay, that's a human solution. But I have fear of economic insecurity, and your plan takes about 2 years. What do I do about the fear of economic insecurity for the 2 years? Oh, you work the spiritual solution, and fear of economic insecurity goes away with no money. You follow what I'm saying? If you had told me that the money problem could be solved without any money, I would go, wrong. But it's not a money problem. It's fear of economic insecurity. I don't have any money and it's making me frightened. What if you had no money and you weren't afraid? I don't think technically that's a solution. I remember saying that. Technically that's not a solution. Why? You said you're afraid when you don't have money and now you're not afraid. Okay, but it's a weird solution. Okay, yes. It's called a spiritual solution. Now, when fear is gone, when resentment's gone, when anger, when all of these character defects, disturbances are gone, guess what happens? The channel opens and our intuition, our intuitive level is now functioning. And we now intuitively know how to handle situations. The way this manifests itself is, what am I going to do? I don't know. I've been trying to get a job. I can't do that. I can't do that. And then we work our spiritual program. We're absolutely quiet and we're just sitting there and we just go, wow, my cousin in Nebraska runs a firm like this and I'm a specialty in that. I bet I could work with him as a consultant. And you call him up and he said, I was just getting ready to call you. Now what's that all about? That's what a spiritual solution looks like. You can't have that hunch on your own. And you can't have it when you're disturbed. So the most creative that we can be is when we're undisturbed. So now we're going to start having faith in something other than ourselves. That is our spiritual self, our higher power, our spiritual self, whatever it is. And so we're going to suddenly find out we don't have to figure life out anymore. We're going to get guided through it by a force greater than ourselves. In the beginning, it's our sponsor, our home group, etc. But eventually we're going to learn how to be guided through each day, knowing that that particular path will be the one that always fixes this. If this is fixed, life is wonderful. So that's our new set of priorities. That's our new realm of the spirit. It only exists in the moment, and it only exists if we're undisturbed. And so this is what I was getting out of the 10th step that was so much fun to see how simple it really is. And in closing, I'm just going to say this in terms of being guided, because I do this in my talks a lot, and because it was my own experience, how silly I was to not choose to believe in any of this. And it goes like this. When I was 12, I was in the Boy Scouts for a year, and I remember the first night, or the first time that the scoutmaster brought out a compass. Maybe you heard this story, but anyway, he brings out a compass, like a little watch thing, and he says, now this will save your life. It was almost like you can turn your will and your life over to this. So what this is, when you open the cover, there's a needle in here, and the needle points to a big rock at the North Pole. Magnetic north. This thing points directly at this big rock at the North Pole. So if you're in the woods and you're lost, take the compass out, you got the little map, and you know if you go south, you're going to be free, blah, blah, blah. It'll save your life. You don't have to worry. Just keep this thing in your pocket, and you can trust your life to it. Now, I didn't raise my hand and go, big rock at the North Pole? You want me to buy that crap? You're going to hand me a compass, and you want me to put my goddamn life on the line with a freaking Mickey Mouse watch with a big rock? Let me see the rock. Let's go up and see the rock. I want to see the rock. I want to see the rock. I want to see the rock. I don't remember doing that. I said, oh, good, I'll trust my life to that. And I stuck it in my pocket. And I just said, boy, am I glad I got this. And then years later, after I got in the Marine Corps, and I'm going through flight school, and we're doing all the various things, and we come to instrument flying, and now they're telling us the story. Now you're going to get in the plane when you can't see anything. And you're going to be flying along. You cannot see the ground. You can't see 2 feet in front of you. And you got to fly in between 2 mountains, and there's a little airstrip down there, and you've got to land on that airstrip. But don't worry. You know, who would worry under those conditions? Don't worry, because there's a radio beacon down there. It sends an invisible beam up to your plane. You just dial that in, you fly down that invisible beam, and at the last second, boop, there's the runway. I didn't raise my hand and go, invisible beam? You want me to go between 2 mountains under a visible beam? Give me a break. I'm going to drive. I just said, what's the frequency? And then we went there, and we went, and there it was. And then we come into AA. And we go, there's this force that created the universe, and these are the procedures to dial this in, and it will guide you on a spiritual journey beyond your wildest dreams. And we go, I ain't buying that. I'm doing a pretty good job by myself. And so it's time to look in the mirror and start laughing at ourselves and just go, God almighty. And so I'll show you how to get spiritual. I'm going to wrap this whole talk up because it really is simple. You go home, you reach in your pocket, and you get your handkerchief out, and you hold it up, and you go like this. You just wave it in front of the mirror. You are now spiritual. Thank you very much.